Yes, as Jan's just introduced, I'm going to be talking about this man here with his fantastic beard. I am very privileged to work in a museum that houses his collection. So Octavius Pickard-Cambridge donated his collection to the museum in 1917. It's about 2,500 jars and has a huge matching archive of correspondence that goes alongside it. I'm not going to talk too much about the actual collection itself today. I'm going to concentrate a bit more on the archive, but both of them represent an untapped resource in some ways. They can be quite difficult to work with, as you will hear in a later talk today, but they contain a lot of treasures, and I'm going to try and tempt perhaps some of you to come and find out a little bit more about things. So here we go. This is Octavius Pickard-Cambridge. We are quite lucky that one of his sons wrote a very good memoir, so I won't give you tons of detail about him. I'll just say at this point in time, so he was born in 1828 in Bloxworth, which is a tiny village in Dorset in England. It can maybe 40 houses in total. It's a very teeny weeny place. He was the 8th child, hence the glorious name of Octavius, which always brings a smile whenever I think about it. And the important thing that I can tell you, because this does still come up from time to time actually, is that the family was originally known as Pickard, but they changed their name officially when Octavius was about 20 in 1848 to Pickard-Cambridge. So he is rightly referred to as Pickard-Cambridge in any of the literature. This was all to do with a family bequest. There was a house involved for changing the name, which seemed like a pretty good deal, I think. He was always into natural history. His early tutors, he was tutored at home, were very keen on it as well. He was surrounded by the beautiful Dorsetshire countryside and the New Forest. So there was lots of things to him to really get into. One of the things that he did in his early life was develop his illustration skills, which would prove to be very important for his scientific career later. I've pulled out this illustration in particular. It's in the Dorset County Museum. It always makes me laugh. He was doing a series of pictures about churches, but you can see he was distracted easily. He's got toads in one corner and bees flying around the flowers, and even a little spider down the bottom, if you can see it, which is quite sweet. He was originally interested in insects and birds to some degree, but switched his interest to spiders, which would be the main focus for the rest of his life, in the early 1850s, after encouragement from Frederick Bond and a Richard Henry Mead, who was a doctor and naturalist. He was interested in a broad range of things, spiders being one of them. That relationship that they had was quite important. So Mead really came up and pioneered the idea that types should be kept in separate tubes, which is where Octavius took it from. And again, the idea that types would stay in the collection. So Octavius made a decision that he would retain specimens of the type species that he described. We have that in publication. So we know that specimens in the collection, given that the labelling is perhaps not as good as it could be with a historic collection, as they always are, we do have this note that we can pull out type specimens. Anyway, moving on, you can see here, this is some of his illustration skills being put to good use. So many, if not all, of the drawings in his publications are his. They were reproduced for printing, of course, but he did the original drawings, which is quite something considering the optics and you know, what they were using as microscopes of the day. We have a whole box of these plate prints in the museum that are all wrapped up in their original pieces of paper that OPC put them in. Often those were related to his work as a reverend and in the area where he lived. And are still in their original condition. So they're a treasure trove in themselves. The early years for Pickard-Cambridge, Octavius, were quite important. Very briefly, I'll run you through this. So he eventually, after trying law and deciding it wasn't for him, went and did a degree in theology and was ordained a deacon. And he took up the curacy of Scarisbrick, which is near Southport, which is just north of Liverpool. And this is important because it enabled him to go and spend time with John Blackwall. which hopefully is a name that you all know. They visited and he spent time with him in 1860. And this is where Octavius really got going on publishing about spiders. So he worked with John Blackwall on his book of British and Irish spiders, which was published in 1864. I think that was where the hook really got wedged in. That was him on spiders for the rest of his career, really, from this point on. And he started his correspondence. So he would write, there's lots of letters between John Blackwall and OPC in our archive, encouraging, working together on the book, adding some mentorship. I've pulled out one of them on the left here just to show you, John writing to say how much he's enjoying the work that Octavius is producing. I particularly enjoyed the excerpt on the right, and we'll come back to Templeton a little later, actually, but it amused me that they all thought he was dead for a little bit, but it turns out, no, he was okay. He was actually I think he was in the army, and he was abroad for quite a long time, which is why they perhaps hadn't heard from him and assumed that something had gone wrong. Anyway, in 1864, Pickard-Cambridge took one of his first 2 trips abroad. The first was to Egypt, where he met his soon-to-be wife, Rose Wallace. Now, Rose lived in Headington in Oxford, so Octavius would pop up to visit his then fiancée and drop in on his friend John Obadiah Westwood, who was the first curator of the Hope entomological collections at the then pretty much newly built Oxford University Museum, which opened in 1860. So that's where the circle closes. They had a friendship that they retained. They would correspond frequently. They had a group of people that would meet up, and I think whenever Octavius was in Oxford, he would pop into the museum and chat to people. There was a very lively group that was engaged in working on collections and corresponding around that time in Oxford. So he met a lot of people that way as well. So it's fantastic that it was just coincidental that his fiancée happened to live in Oxford, and that link was built. And I think that's how we ended up with the collection in Oxford as part of this. The second trip that OPC took was in 1865. The following year, he went to visit Syria and Palestine, doing a tour of the Holy Lands. The important bit about this really is his journey back through Europe afterwards, because he took the time to come back through a number of different countries across Europe, and took the opportunity as part of that to go and visit naturalists and especially arachnologists. He spent a bit of time with Herrick Schaefer. Most importantly, he went and spent some time with Ludwig Koch, and they established another friendship that lasted via correspondence for many years. So we have specimens and records and correspondence between both OPC and Koch about the work that they were doing. So they would review manuscripts and exchange specimens and all sorts of things. So it was really the start of something wonderful, and it got built on. Here we have a copy of one of the notebooks that we have in the archive. These are marvelous once you can read the handwriting. So in 1866, it's worth me saying that Octavius settled into a cottage in Bloxworth. He was to become rector of the area a couple of years later after his father passed away. And he almost never left again after that, other than visiting immediate family. And for a few years, he would take trips up to London. But he sort of fell out with London a little bit because they wouldn't let him take the spiders out of the tubes in the collection to study them properly. So he decided that he wasn't going to do that anymore. So he stayed at home. So the correspondence really became his main route, his main link to joining up with people around the globe. It was a worldwide correspondence network that he had, and the archive is huge as a result. The notebooks, especially this one you can see in front of you, it details the specimens that were coming in and out, people with a list of species, things that he identified, what people gave him, what he sent to others, exchanges, debts and all this kind of thing. So if you can read the handwriting and you have the time, you can actually pick through all of the parcels, the lists of specimens that were going to and fro and flowing around the globe. He seems to have been sending stuff almost daily at some points, and stuff would arrive in the morning post and he'd identify it and send it out again in the afternoon post. It was really quite something. And this was all while having obviously a family of his own and being rector of quite a large area, and keeping up. But obviously spiders were a real passion for him by this time. This is almost a complete record of his exchanges, although there are some notable exceptions, as you will hear a bit later on in another talk. The list of correspondence is just too long for me to go into here. So I'm going to throw up, these are marvellous brown paper envelopes that contain beautiful letters inside. The teaser is you get to see the envelope. Hopefully you'll recognise a few of the names on the outsides of some of these envelopes though. He wrote to anybody who had an interest in spiders, and anyone who had an interest in spiders wrote to Octavius, it seems. There are many naturalists on that list, people who are known perhaps or better known perhaps for being botanists. There's lots of doctors, people who travelled or worked abroad, including people in the military forces. Octavius seems to have been extremely generous with his time and his expertise. He cultivated his relationships. The letters often contain personal information, and we've only got the responses, of course, but people are obviously carrying on conversations. They know about his wife, his family, his children, and they discuss other people in the community as well, obviously. We do know that he had lots of people to visit the house, so that was one method he overcame. So if people were in the UK, they would often pop by. It was quite, they would be hosted as guests. It was quite a fun time, I think, to go and visit. So, and they were encouraged. So that was a really nice way for them to keep in touch. Here is some of the contents. Letters often contain illustrations, such as this one on the left, which is from John Traherne Moggridge, who worked on, among things, trapdoor spiders. These are some of my favourites in particular, because he and Octavius spent a lot of time illustrating the nests of the spiders, and we actually have some of these in the collection. Unfortunately, Moggridge died when he was only 32, but he did manage to get a book on trapdoor spiders published, in which I think OPC did some of the descriptions and things, which is really nice. On the right, we have a complete unpublished manuscript in our archive. This one's from Robert Templeton, who I mentioned earlier. He's was an Irish naturalist, surgeon in the army, and he spent a lot of time traveling the world, hence people thinking that perhaps he died. He did a whole manuscript, and you will note that it says never before figured at the very top of that illustration. It's quite beautiful. I have yet to plumb the depths. I just found this the other day and was amazed that we still have these things hiding out that I have yet to find in the archive, because it really is that big. Other notable correspondence, which are
5 minutes.
Thank you, Jan. Which are perhaps some of the more relevant names for people around the room. So we've got, as I said earlier, correspondence with Ludwig Koch at the top. You will see that goes almost through to the end of OPC's life when he died, so 1917. We have Władysław Kulinski, I hope I've pronounced that correctly, with translations. So he was a Polish naturalist who worked on spiders. So Arthur Wallace, one of OPC's sons, I believe his eldest, helped with translations. He also helped arrange the collection once it came to Oxford, and for a while was one of the correspondents with Poulton, who was the then curator, helping to sort out issues in the collection. So there's a lovely series of letters that we've got where Poulton writes to Arthur Wallace and says, what would your father have done, when there's a request that's come in from Eugene Simon, which is another one of the correspondents, of which we have 5 enormous packets of letters that we've yet to go through. Unfortunately, my French is not good enough to be able to read the contents of those letters. Otherwise, that would be one of it's a real treasure, and needs some work on that one. There's a lot to go through. Anyway, so Poulton had corresponded with Arthur Wallace, and he immediately wrote back and said, you know, my father would have sent these things out straight away. He would not have hesitated at all. OPC never held back. He never kind of ring-fenced his own research or anything like that. And he was always happy to take other people's opinions on things. So he wasn't necessarily always pleased that people moved things or suggested that perhaps he'd got his work wrong, but that never stopped him from sharing his research and putting people in contact with other people. I think he really had a passion for the science and a love for spiders itself, so he never really held back on that front. One of my favourite sets of correspondence that I've not shown here is from Tord Tamerlan Theodor Thorell. We have a huge amount of correspondence. He was very friendly with Pickard-Cambridge, and that's where some of the stories about their personal lives come in. We've got a project at the moment to digitise those letters and pull out some of the background to the people, as much as we have about the specimens and some of the types that we found in the collection. So I'm very lucky that Dmitry Loganov has agreed to work with me on this to pull those out, because it's relatively unknown, it's not published, and there are many bits like this you'll hear later about the Yarkand expedition that will show you some of these things that we just don't know. So there's the teaser and the taster for the collection. I had a go at mapping the locations for some of the most frequent correspondence, because this is Pickard-Cambridge's World Wide Web. These are just the top 15 correspondence sites. I tried to add in more, and I even had a go at trying to map out where all the specimens came from, because a lot of the people that he corresponded with travelled themselves, and they would send spiders back for Octavius to work on. He was one of the main people of his day and age. It just got so messy you wouldn't have been able to see the world after that. So I want you to mentally picture many more links in this World Wide Web. It really is quite something. And just to end then, I'm just going to say thank you for listening, for starters, but I just wanted to, possibly in a slightly cheesy way, just kick off the symposium just to say that I really have enjoyed being part of the arachnological community. This is something that I've come to relatively recently in my own career, much like Pickard-Cambridge. I swapped from insects over to spiders, and that spirit of correspondence and sharing and collaboration that I see from studying the Pickard-Cambridge collection in all of its detailed glory, I think really does exist to this day. I think it's been a really solid foundation, and I'm really proud to be part of the arachnological community as a result. So thank you all, thank you for listening, and thank you for having me here.